soul is warm, and life's much more if we live it up.
Morning, everyone. I'm Meredith Dankos. I'm the lead pastor here at The Well. And if you are joining us online or on the app, you can go ahead and fill out our digital Connect card. Let us know that you're here, how we can pray for you. If you're in person and you have our app, you can fill out our Connect card on there and let us know how we can be praying for you here. Let us know that you're here. And also, Matt said if you're new, you can fill out the paper Connect card and let us know how we can help you get more connected. So we are doing a series called Like a Child, where we've been looking at how children's books give us a new perspective on the teachings of Jesus. And Seth Godin, in his book, The Icarus Deception, he says there's a difference between our comfort zone and our safety zone. And too often we get those mixed up. And staying in our comfort zone can often prevent us from growing, because we assume if I'm out of my comfort zone, I'm out of my safety zone. And James Bemner, he says, in order to grow in courage and trust, we need to be exposed to things that are scary but not dangerous. So scary but not dangerous. So you get out of your comfort zone, you're still in your safety zone. And so things like, children trying new foods, scary, not dangerous. Or telling someone when your feelings were hurt, right? Scary, not dangerous. You're probably not in actual danger, but it can feel like you are going on a roller coaster, applying for a new job. All those things feel a bit scary. They get you out of your comfort zone, but you're not necessarily out of your safety zone. And in order to grow and mature in life, we need to grow in courage and we need to grow in trust. And it's the same thing with faith. In order to grow in your faith, you need to grow in courage and you need to grow in trust. And that's what our story embodies today. So we're going to start with our children's story, and we're going to have a little read along again, and it's called The Dark by Lemony Snicket. So sit back and enjoy The Dark. Laszlo was afraid of the dark. The dark lived in the same house as Laszlo, a big place with a creaky roof, smooth, cold windows, and several sets of stairs. Just going to pause right here and let you know that I am originally from New Hampshire, and you are going to hear my New England accent come out in some of the words in this book. I recognize that I say it different than you, so you can point it out later. Like roof. I get that, okay? Okay. Sometimes the dark hid in the closet. Sometimes it sat behind the shower curtain. But mostly, it spent its time in the basement. All day long, the dark would wait in a distant corner, far from the squeaks and rattles of the washing machine, pressed up against some old, damp boxes and a chest of drawers nobody ever opened. At night, of course, the dark went out and spread itself against the windows and doors of Laszlo's house. But in the morning, the dark would be back in the basement where it belonged. Laszlo would peek at the dark every morning. "Hi," he would say. "Hi, dark." Laszlo thought that if he visited the dark in the dark's room, maybe the dark wouldn't come visit him in his room. But one night, it did. "Laszlo," the dark said, in the dark. The voice of the dark was as creaky as the roof on the house and as smooth and cold as the windows. And even though the dark was right next to Laszlo, the voice seemed very far away. "What do you want?" asked Laszlo. "I want to show you something," said the dark. "In here?" "No," said the dark. "Here?" "No, no," said the dark. "Downstairs." "Downstairs?" "Yes," said the dark. In Laszlo's living room was the biggest window in the house. Laszlo looked out at all the dark outside. Above him, the roof creaked, and he closed his eyes, and now the dark was all Laszlo could see. "No, no," said the dark again. "Not there. Down here." "In the basement?" asked Laszlo. "Yes," said the dark. Laszlo had never dared to come to the dark's room at night. "Come closer," said the dark. Laszlo came closer. "Even closer," said the dark. You might be afraid of the dark, but the dark is not afraid of you. That's why the dark is always close by. The dark peeks around the corner and waits behind the door, and you can see the dark up in the sky almost every night, gazing down at you as you gaze up at the stars. Without a creaky roof, the rain would fall on your bed. And without a smooth, cold window, you would never see outside. And without a set of stairs, you could never go into the basement where the dark spends its time. Without a closet, you would have nowhere to put your shoes. And without a shower curtain, you would splash water all over the bathroom. And without the dark, everything would be light, and you would never know if you needed a light bulb. Bottom drawer, said the dark. What? Bottom drawer, said the dark. Open the bottom drawer. Thank you, said Laszlo. You're welcome, said the dark. By the time Laszlo got back into bed, the dark was no longer in his room, except when he closed his eyes to go to sleep. The next morning, Laszlo visited the dark in the basement. Hi, he said. Hi, dark. The dark didn't answer, but the bottom drawer was still open, so it looked like something in the corner was smiling. The dark kept on living with Laszlo, but it never bothered him again. The end. Okay, so a lot of you can probably relate to going down to a dark basement, but those of you who are from Oklahoma, I now know that there are no basements here. So maybe you have never experienced the fear of going down into a dark basement. So I wanted to give you what that experience might be like.
Hello? Rod? Uncle Frank? Uncle Frank, is this a joke? Megan? Lenny? Is this a joke? It's only my imagination. Only my imagination.
So that's what it's like to go down in a scary basement, in case you've never been down in one. It's scary. It's scary. But while you might not be able to relate to being in a basement, everyone has a little bit of a fear of the dark, right? Because there's unknown in the dark. And so we can kind of relate to Laszlo. Laszlo, because he's afraid of the dark, he's ordered his whole life to try to avoid the thing that he's afraid of. And he thinks, well, if I visit the dark in the dark storm, if I say hi to the dark, maybe the dark won't come and bother me. Maybe the dark will leave me alone. Because, see, he's trying to stay inside of his comfort zone. And we do the same thing, right? We order our lives around the thing that we are most afraid of, the thing that we're trying to avoid and keep at bay. And so sometimes we do that by obsessing over the way that we look to avoid the fear of aging. Or we comfort ourselves with food to avoid the fear of loneliness. Or sometimes we ignore symptoms because we want to avoid the fear of a diagnosis. We don't talk about marriage problems. We don't talk about problems with our kids. We don't talk about problems with our work. We avoid talking about addictive behaviors. And all these things, we just try to stay in our comfort zone because we're afraid of what will come to light, what we'll actually see. But see, Laszlo, he tried to keep the dark away, but the dark comes and visits him. And the dark comes to visit him and take him out of his comfort zone, bring him all the way down to the scary basement to show him something, to teach him something, to teach him that we need the dark, just like we need a roof and just like we need a window and a shower curtain, we need the dark to know when we need a light bulb. We need the dark to know the difference between light and day, right? And so he was out of his comfort zone, but he wasn't out of his safety zone. And he needed to be exposed to something that was scary but not dangerous in order to see there wasn't really anything to truly be afraid of. That's how we grow in courage. That's how we grow in trust. And that is exactly how Jesus grows us in faith. He takes us out of our comfort zone, but reminds us we're always in our safety zone with him. So our story today is from Mark chapter 4, and it goes like this. That day when evening came, he said to his disciples, Let us go over to the other side." Leaving the crowd behind, they took him along, just as he was in the boat. There were also other boats with him. A furious squall came up, and the waves broke over the boat so that it was nearly swamped. Jesus was in the stern, sleeping on a cushion. The disciples woke him and said to him, "Teacher, don't you care if we drown?" He got up, rebuked the wind, and said to the waves, "Quiet, be still." Then the wind died down, and it was completely calm. He said to his disciples, "Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith?" They were terrified and asked each other, "Who is this? Even the wind and the waves obey him." So let's recap this story just for a minute. All right, it's getting dark. Jesus has been teaching, it's getting dark, and he tells his disciples, "Come on, we're going to go somewhere else. We're going to go to the other side." And now the other side is where the Gentiles live. And that's not where Jews go. They don't go to the other side. In fact, they go the very long way around to avoid the other side. But he's like, "We're going to go there." So he's taking them in the dark already, and now he's taking them to a place that they don't go, to go hang out with people that you're not supposed to like and you're not supposed to be around. And then he says, "Let's take the boat over." And here's the thing about Israelites. They're not water people, okay? There's a few of them who are fishermen by trade, but as a whole, not water people, because for them, water represents the forces of chaos and destruction and evil, and so they generally stayed away from the water. And so Jesus has said, "Hey, I know, let's go way out of your comfort zone. We're going to go when it's dark, we're going to get in a boat, and we're going to go someplace that you're not supposed to go." So they're in this boat, and then suddenly this storm kicks up out of nowhere. And they're terrified. They're so afraid. And Jesus is asleep. And they wake him up and they say, "Don't you care that we're going to drown?" He calms the storm. And then he turns to them. And it feels like Jesus chastises his disciples and says, "Why don't you have any faith? What's the matter with you? What's wrong with you?" And we hear that and we think, "Ooh, I don't feel very good." Like, what were they supposed to do, right? Were they supposed to ask differently or not be afraid of the storm? Were they supposed to try to calm the storm themselves? Is it the fear that makes it that their lack of faith? What qualifies as a lack of faith here? And the reality is fear is what dominates this story. The fear of the disciples marks this entire story, and it's described like this: a phobos megos. Phobos megos in Greek, and that means to be afraid with a very great fear. So they are afraid with a very great fear. And so we have to wonder, are they over-exaggerating? Is the fear the problem? So let's start with the storm. Are they just blowing the storm out of proportion? Well, it's described as a furious squall, which is a very big, big storm. And they're on the Sea of Galilee. And the Sea of Galilee has this unique geographical element to it where it can be very calm 1 minute, and then out of nowhere, a very, very big storm can kick up. And you have to remember, there are experienced fishermen on this boat, right? While Israelites as a whole were not water people, there were some people on this boat who that's what they did for a living. They fished on the Sea of Galilee regularly. And so they're throwing everything they know at this storm, and they've come to the end of their ability to control the situation, right? So when they wake Jesus up and say, "Hey, we're about to drown," they're serious, right? They know the difference between a minor storm that they can navigate and something that is life-threatening. So they are in a life-threatening situation. And we have to look at Jesus' response to the storm. Because how does Jesus treat that? He doesn't wake up and be like, "This isn't a storm. You woke me up for this?" What? And he doesn't "Oh, storm, I'll show you a storm," right? He stands up and he calms the storm. He says, "Peace, be quiet." And the words that he uses towards that storm are the same words that he uses when he's casting out demonic forces, right? So this is a big deal. The storm is legit. So it's not that they're having a fear reaction in the midst of, it's a natural reaction to the situation they're in. So it's not their fear that he's addressing. It's what they say before they talk about the storm. Because they say to him, "Don't you care that we're going to drown? Don't you care?" And you can probably relate to the disciples in this moment. When your life gets dark and stormy, right, and it feels like it's taking on water, and you feel like you are drowning under all of the circumstances that life is throwing at you, our natural response is to turn to God and say, "Don't you care?" It can feel like you are asleep on the job. My life is going under. Where are you? Don't you care? Their phobos megos is our phobos megos. Where is God when things get desperate? And when we hear Jesus' question, don't you have any faith? We often hear shame in that question. Shame on you. What is it going to take for you to get it? What is it going to take for you to believe it? When are you going to get your act together, right? We hear shame because we think faith means certainty. We think faith means you are completely convinced, you are 100% convicted of God's love. You are so convinced that nothing could rattle that. We think faith means certainty. And so if faith means certainty, then yeah, Jesus is chastising them. Why were you not certain that I would wake up and calm this storm? Why were you not certain that I cared for you? But faith doesn't mean certainty. And Barbara Brown Taylor, in her book, Learning to Walk in the Dark, she talks about the difference between lunar and solar spirituality. And I find this to be very helpful. So she talks about solar spirituality, where we often say the sun is the best metaphor for faith, right? Because the sun is bright and it's light and God is in the light. And so, when we talk about solar spirituality, then we're talking about there are reliable answers. And we need to have a positive outlook. And we need to have firm convictions at all times. And you know what? It's really easy when everything is light and bright in life to rely on reliable answers and firm convictions and have a positive outlook. But when darkness shows up, it can get really tricky. Like when your marriage falls apart, or suddenly your kid is acting out and making poor decisions that you can't stop them from doing that. Or, your marriage falls apart, you don't fit into the mold that your family expected you to fit into, right? Like there was a role you were supposed to play, there was a career you were supposed to take, and suddenly you didn't fit into that. You're supposed to act a certain way. Or suddenly you start doubting things in the Bible, and you're like, man, I don't did Jonah really get eaten by a whale? I'm not sure if I believe that. And when we have solar spirituality, where everything is in the light, everything is light and bright, we say you just need more faith. You need more faith, but what we mean is you need more certainty. Darkness came about because God is in the light. God didn't move. So if darkness has showed up in your life, it's something that you've done. You moved. There's some mistake that you made, and so you need to get your act together. Why don't you have more faith? You just need to get your convictions more firm, right? You just need to have a better attitude about what's going on in your life. You need to be more certain. You need to be more convinced. And so the implicit and sometimes explicit assumption is you're the problem. You're the problem, right? God's not the problem. You're the problem. Darkness is something to be avoided. Darkness is something that is a threat. And so when darkness creeps in, do you know what we often do when we only have solar spirituality? Is we ignore it, we deny it, we downplay it. And you know what's most tragic of all? People leave the church over it. They leave the church because they say, there's no place for me because I'm not certain enough and I'm not convinced enough. And I can't just keep smiling and pretending that everything's okay. Things aren't okay. And I don't know if I believe everything that you're talking about. And so when darkness shows up, if we only see it as a threat, it's more likely to knock us out. And Barbara Brown Taylor talks about darkness like this. She says, darkness is shorthand for anything that scares me, that I want no part of, either because I am sure I do not have the resources to survive it, or because I do not want to find out. The absence of God is there, along with the fear of dementia and the loss of those nearest and dearest to me. So darkness is that thing that I'm so afraid of. And just like Laszlo, we order our lives around it to say, I don't want it to touch me. I'm too afraid of it. I'm just going to ignore it. And maybe if I try to control all of my circumstances, it will never come near me. It will never come visit me. But she talks about how solar spirituality isn't actually the most helpful metaphor for us. That in fact, the sun isn't the best metaphor, but the moon is the best metaphor. Because the moon, the light waxes and wanes. And that is just the rhythm of the moon, that sometimes things are bright and sometimes things are not bright. And she says this, all in all, the moon is a truer mirror for my soul than the sun that looks the same every day. After I stopped thinking that all these fluctuations meant something was wrong with me, a great curiosity opened up. What would my life with God look like if I trusted this rhythm instead of opposing it? And in that question, Barbara Brown Taylor is getting at the true meaning of faith. Because faith doesn't mean certainty. It doesn't mean that you are convinced of everything. Faith means trust. That's what that word, it is synonymous with the word trust. And I often give this image about trust that say you're up at the very top of a tree. You're up very, very high, and there's this long limb out in front of you, and you hear God say, go out to the end of the limb. What you do not do is run out to the end of the, I mean, maybe if you're crazy and you have like no fear of anything, but you wouldn't just run out to the end of the limb. What you would do is you would put your weight out on one step and see, did that hold me? Okay? And then you take one more step and see if it holds you. To trust is to be able to put your weight out on something, to be able to step out and trust that's going to hold you. And the only reason you need trust is because there is a degree of uncertainty. There's the possibility that you're not safe. There's a possibility that you're out of your safety zone, right? And because you sat down in these chairs and you trusted that these chairs are going to hold you. There is a possibility that one of those chairs would not, right? But you chose to trust a chair because you've sat in chairs long enough that you assume chairs are going to hold me, right? But that's what trust is. Trust is this assumption that things are going to go this way even if there's a possibility that it could go a different way. That you're working towards my good, even if you have the ability to work towards my bad, you won't because I trust you. That's what faith is. So faith isn't convincing yourself of God's love. Faith is continuing to step out and trust that God loves you. That's what faith is, right? And so it's easier if we make darkness about punishment or test. That's way easier because punishment or test, you still get to be in control, right? If someone's testing you, then you got to be in control of passing it. If someone's punishing you, then you got to fix it so it goes away. But the reality is darkness in life just is. Sometimes it is because of a bad decision that you've made. Sometimes it just happens. It just does. Life waxes and wanes like the moon. And if we have that understanding that the darkness isn't necessarily because you did something wrong, but God is still faithful and trustworthy in the darkness, that the darkness has a gift for us, just like the darkness had a gift for Laszlo to teach him to not be afraid that with the darkness, sometimes it shows you that you need a light bulb, right? The darkness for us, those dark things that show up in life, there are lessons for us in that. God does not cause the darkness. Jesus didn't cause the storm in order to teach the disciples a lesson. And the disciples weren't able to control the situation. They were beyond that. But what the gift of the darkness gives us is it reveals that phobos megos. It reveals that deep fear that we've been trying to avoid, that fear of God, in my desperate moment, do you care? Do you love me? Can I keep putting my weight out on this? Can I trust you even when I can't see you? Even when I can't see you at work? You know, and that's the gift. It's this invitation to trust. And I learned that in one of the darkest moments in my life. So my daughter is 10. Her name is Imogen. And 10 years ago, a little over 10 years ago, I was 33 weeks pregnant. And we found out very quickly that she was in distress in the womb. And so I was rushed to the hospital. And, you know, again, she was due January 27th. She came December 12th. Okay, so that's a long difference, right? And before, I'm a pastor, and she was supposed to come after Christmas, came well before Christmas. We were not prepared. And we went to the hospital, and within under 24 hours, we learned she's in distress. We're trying to keep her in as long as we possibly can to help the steroids develop her lungs. And I ended up having an emergency C-section. And I was not prepared to be a mom, and I definitely was not prepared to be a mom under these circumstances. And so they rushed her away to the NICU. She was under 4 pounds. And I because of all the medication that I was on and the surgery, I wasn't able to see her till the next day. Steve had got to see her the first day, but I couldn't see her till the next day. And they wheeled me down, and I just was not prepared for what I saw. And this is what she looked like. She was 4 pounds, and she was covered in tubes and wires, and she was in this little incubator. Show the next photo there. And you know, it's just so small, and you couldn't touch her. And there I am, and I'm looking at her, and I was like, I don't know how to do this. Like, being a mom for the first time is already overwhelming, but I don't know what I'm doing. I am terrified, and I had that phobos megos. God, do you see me? Because I am way in over my head here. Do you care? And Steve told me, he said, you can reach in and touch her. And so when I did, I reached and I touched her, and her little finger wrapped around, this will give you a scale. Like, that's her little fingers around my finger, right? So tiny. And her little fingers wrapped around my finger. I can never tell this without crying. And her oxygen level went up to 100% at that moment. and she knew me. And in that moment, I felt God's presence surround me and say, I see you. I am with you. You are not alone in this. Right? I was well out of my comfort zone. But God reminded me that with Jesus, I am never out of my safety zone. And that was day 1 of 3 weeks, right? This wasn't like, and then it was all, it was a long journey, and there was lots of ups and downs, and it was very scary, and a lot could have gone wrong, and a lot did. But that moment, I needed that moment for God to remind me, I am always with you. I am always with you. And so when darkness shows up in your life, Jesus doesn't expect you to just muster up courage and conviction and to be sure and certain. That's not what this story is about. Jesus does not ask the disciples a shaming question. Why don't you have any faith? Jesus asks them a probing question. Why don't you trust me? Why don't you trust me? What will it take for you to trust me? Because Jesus, when he wakes up, he doesn't wrestle the storm. He doesn't battle the storm. He says one word, and the storm is calmed. Jesus shows them over and over again, I am someone who you can trust. I am someone who is on your side. And we are told that if you want to know the heart of God, if you want to know what God is like, what God cares about, what God thinks about you, you look at Jesus. He is the exact image of God. He says, if you want to know the Father, you look at me. He's the visible image of the invisible God. If you want to know what God is like, that's what God is like. God is a God who can stand up and calm the storm with one word. And he is dying for you to trust him. He is desperate for you to trust that he loves you and he's on your side. They were not in their comfort zone, but they were not out of their safety zone because Jesus was still in the boat. Barbara Brown Taylor says it like this. Meanwhile, here is some good news you can use. Even when light fades and darkness falls, as it does every single day, in every single life, God does not turn the world over to some other deity. Even when you cannot see where you are going and no one answers when you call, this is not sufficient proof that you are alone. Here is the testimony of faith. Darkness is not dark to God. The night is as bright as the day. And so when you've reached the end of your ability to manage and control a situation, when you feel the darkness has entered in, it's not that you have to get more certain. It's not that you have to find more courage in yourself. It is a gift. It is an invitation to step out and trust, to grow in faith. That's the gift that only the darkness can offer us. Just like you wouldn't know if you need a light bulb without the darkness, you wouldn't know how to trust without darkness. And God doesn't cause the darkness in your life to teach you a lesson. We can never say that enough. God doesn't cause sickness. God doesn't cause death. God doesn't cause unemployment. God does not cause bad things to happen in your life. But God will use everything. God will use everything to show you who he is. Nothing is wasted in the kingdom of God. Your pain is not wasted. The darkness is not wasted in the kingdom of God. And so the question for us as we close here is, what's that thing that you have been ordering your life around to not get near? What's that thing that you keep at bay and you think, well, maybe if I do this, then I won't see it. Or maybe if I do this, and if I just, I can eat my feelings away, or I can work my feelings away, or I can just, dance my feelings away. Whatever it is that you're doing to try to keep that thing at bay, there's a gift for you in it. There's a gift for you when you've reached the end of yourself. And it's the gift of faith. It's the gift of trusting and learning to trust and learning to lean on that God is on your side. Let's pray. Gracious God, we're so grateful for who you are, how you love us, how you're always working for our good, and that you're never far, God. Even when we feel like you might be far, even when we feel alone, that is not sufficient proof that we are alone. So God, I pray today, I know that there are people who have been in the grip of fear. I know that there are people who have been ordering their lives to avoid something that just feels like it's too much. God, I pray that you would give us the trust, the ability to turn towards you with it, Lord. And to know that with you, the darkness is not dark at all. God, that with you, nothing is wasted. That with you, you will use everything to grow us in love and faith and set us free, God, because that is what you want to do. Fear, it imprisons us and it binds us. And it makes us live these small, controlled lives that don't have joy. And God, I pray today that chains would fall off. I pray today that people would step into whatever it is that you have, God, knowing that it might be hard and it might hurt and it might be scary, but there is joy on the other side, Lord, that you are all about life, life and more life. God, release us from the grip of fear. Release us from that phobos megos, that thing that we are afraid of with a very great fear. Bring us into your kingdom in a holy way, that we would be a testimony for who you are. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.